Hello, I'm Beth from O'Brien Glass.
I'm Marty from Dulux.
And I'm Nicky from Arches the Strata Professionals. The three of us are proud to bring this live streamed event to you today.
Thank you, Dawn. Thank you, everybody. Has everybody taken their seats? Lovely. Okay, well, thank you all so much for coming. We have a big evening ahead of us as we conduct the Great Strata debate. Caretakers, bylaws and committees creating harmonious communities. This is the last of our 6 roadshows all through Queensland that we've done over the last month, and we've left the best till last. There's also another big welcome to our online viewers. This is the first time we've been able to live stream a Smart Strata event, and we welcome you all. Tonight we'll have live stream viewers from Queensland, interstate, and those that couldn't attend our regional areas. The ability to live stream has been brought to you by Dulux, O'Brien Glass and Arches the Strata Professionals, so thank you both. Okay, so exciting guest speakers. Let me tell you all about them and what we're going to be doing today. So we have Jason Carlson from Grace Lawyers. We have Trevor Rawnsley, the CEO of ARAMA. Did you invite... You beat me to it. I thought he invited his wife. We also have Esera from HWL Ebsworth. And for those of you that have been getting the signatures on the passports, it's okay. The ones from Grace and HWL don't need to be signed. You'll still go in the draw. Our facilitator tonight is Chris Irons. He's from Stratasolve, and he'll be facilitating the debate and making sure we all know what the 3 points of view are in this great debate. I'll introduce and hand over to him shortly. So before we get started, a little bit of housekeeping. The amenities are just behind the gentleman with the camera. And if you need to go, please don't let me stop you. The exits are here and here with the little men, and the assembly point, if there is an issue, we need to go across the road to the park. I usually say if there's a fire, then run, but that's never very funny. So with your mobile phones, make sure they're switched to silent because we are live streaming and we want to give the best opportunity for our online viewers to be able to hear the debate tonight. Okay. Just a quick few things about Smart Strata and Arches for those of you that are new to this in the room. Smart Strata is an initiative of Arches. We provide support to strata industries in Queensland and the communities wanting to empower you to be able to make the right education because you're all volunteers. So we put these on to make sure that you're connected with the right people, you have transparency about how this works, and that we can give you education along the way. We couldn't do this without our suppliers that you've been able to meet throughout the night so far, and you'll be able to meet later on today. They contribute towards making sure that you know the best and viable trade for whatever you need in your scheme. So the best part about this initiative is committees go on after they get Dulux to paint their scheme, and they'll say it was great, it was not, it was this, and you're able to look at what another committee member has experienced. So that transparency, I think, is well worth it for you on committees. So we thank our sponsors for attending tonight. Thank you all, and go visit them afterwards after you have some food. So just a little bit about Archers. Exciting. This year is our 40th birthday and we're trying to make sure that we have as much reach as possible, and to have so many people in the room, we're very grateful. All of our team here have their Archers shirt on. Please make sure you go and say hello, and any burning questions they might be able to answer for you. So before I get this exciting night underway with Chris and the team, feedback forms. So these nights are only put on because we know what you want. So we'd love to know what you think, how we can make it better. So make sure you fill out your feedback forms at the end of the night. For those of you who are online, there is a QR code that you can go on and put your feedback forms in, or there will be an email that's sent to you later tonight for you to put them in. Okay, the guts. How it works. The objective is today is how to determine how we create a harmonious strata community, and we need your help to do so. For the purist in the room, I know that a debate is usually 6 apiece, but we thought 3 divergent views would be suitable to get a robust debate happening. So this is what we're going to do. Chris Irons will invite each panellist up for 5 minutes of uninterrupted time, and I know for the lawyers that's going to be hard. And then our facilitator will take 3 minutes just to talk to the actual panellist about their position. After which, the 3 speakers have put their position together. We will get them up here, the 4, including the facilitator, for you to have a facilitated discussion on that, the Q&A. So with that in mind, I'll welcome our facilitator, and I know you've heard me say Chris Irons a few times, so for those who don't already know, Chris has unmatched perspective in the strata industry. He's a thought leader on strata issues and how to resolve them. He was a Queensland Body Corporate Commissioner for 5 years, a role that's not held anywhere in the world, and he's now an independent contractor, and he helps his clients untangle strata disputes with some new and very intuitive ways of solving these disputes. So we're very lucky for him to facilitate this today, and I'd like to invite Chris up to the microphone. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nicky. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, everyone, for making the effort to come out tonight. This is the 5th of these events that I've been involved in. Save the best till last, as Nicky said. And I started out with the first event being a little bit cynical about the idea of harmony. I questioned whether it was actually possible and whether, in fact, you should even be trying. And that was fine. And then we progressed over a few more events, and I started to sort of change my outlook a little bit. And I started talking about the idea of words in strata and how words absolutely have meaning and effect in strata, and particularly the way they're used, who they're used against, the kinds of words. I'm a bit of a word nerd. For tonight, though, I think I've started to come around. All those things remain true, but one more thing that I've started to think about lately is the idea that things only change unless somebody decides to make the change happen. There is that old saying, be the change that you want to be, and I guess that's a little bit of a variation of it. So in strata in particular, nothing ever changes and nothing moves forward unless the parties involved in it want to try and make it move forward. Now, sometimes actually making something moving forward is doing nothing, oddly enough. Doing nothing is always a choice in strata. But usually, getting to harmony is about deciding to do something, whether you decide to do something with somebody else's assistance or yourself, or based upon information you find yourself. I might get you to sort of reflect upon that point as we work our way through our range of guest speakers. Our first guest speaker, or our first of the, would you call them debaters tonight, is Jason Carlson from Grace Lawyers. So Grace Lawyers is a strata law firm that acts exclusively for bodies corporate and committees. Jason is the partner in charge of the firm's Queensland team. He's also been a director of Strata Community Association in Queensland since 2016. I'm also on the board with Jason, and he has been on its legislation committee since 2013. And I'm also on that legislation committee with Jason. His contributions to and leadership within Queensland's strata industry were recognised when he received the SCA Queensland's President Award in 2020. Jason, come on up.
All right, thank you, Chris. Oh, thank you. I don't mean to imply that Chris and Nicky are rather short. However, if you'd bear with me. Ooh. Okay, how to create harmonious strata communities. I'm going to introduce three concepts that I think go to the creation of harmonious strata communities. The first is the ability to get rid of people that are not harmonious in and of themselves. The second is the ability of bodies corporate to choose who they contract with and on what terms. And the third is changing the way that most people are communicating with each other in the 21st century. I want to begin by speaking about one of the great philosophers of the 20th century. Rocky Balboa. Rocky once said that if you hang around with nice people, you get nice friends. If you hang around with smart people, you get smart friends. And if you hang around with yo-yo people, you get yo-yo friends. Now, there's only two places in the world where you can't choose who you hang around with, and that's strata communities and prisons. Not everyone's suited for living with others, and the only barrier to entry into a strata community is the ability to purchase or rent a lot. Perhaps that needs to change. Perhaps there needs to be a mechanism for a community of like-minded owners to decide that one amongst them simply cannot harmoniously coexist with the others. So they should go elsewhere with their nuisance behaviour, their dozens of weekly email complaints, their unending stream of adjudication applications, and their refusal to comply with the bylaws. Associations can expel members whose values are not conducive with theirs, and companies can move on employees who damage their business. The promotion of community values should trump the inherent rights that come with property ownership to provide confidence and harmony within strata communities. Within every strata community sits a network of people working towards a common goal. Some call it a triangle of management. That's the committee, the caretaker, and the strata manager working together to create beneficial outcomes. But there is an imbalance in these roles. The tenure of a committee is no more than a year, from one AGM election to the next. Each year, that committee must demonstrate why they are the most suitable people for those positions. The tenure of a strata manager can be no more than 3 years. They must demonstrate on a regular basis the service they provide and the value that they bring to that community. The tenure of a caretaker or a building manager is up to 10 to 25 years. The contract for that engagement is imposed on the body corporate by a developer who sells the management rights for profit. The caretaker enjoys a security of tenure far greater than anyone else in this triangle. Now, before I stumbled into the law, I worked in a Video Easy store. That store was owned by a lovely gentleman named George. Now, George was the Basil Fawlty of the video rental industry. He loved his video store, but he was very inconvenienced by the human beings who customed it. If anyone asked him to search the computer to see whether the store had a particular movie available, he would mutter under his breath about the inconvenience he was being put to and glare at the customer who was too lazy to spend 15 minutes walking the aisles to find it themselves. On the same street, a new Blockbuster had opened. And that store was amazing. George's Video Easy store went out of business within 2 years. Those in the market to rent a video had the power of choice. George was not guaranteed their custom. The customers voted with their feet. Committees can never take their positions for granted. They must prove their service each and every year. Strata managers can never take their positions for granted. They are regularly put under the microscope. Last year, Victoria banned service contracts exceeding 3 years imposed by a developer for profit, except in hotel or resort accommodation. New South Wales ended them a decade ago. Developers should not be able to impose long-term service contracts on bodies corporate. It should be left to the bodies corporate to independently decide what is in their own best interests and to negotiate the terms of service contracts for their own community. A few weeks ago, an article of mine was published by Smart Strata called "Keyboards Don't Have Feelings." It considered a study carried out decades ago which focused on a person delivering a message that involved disagreement, strong emotion, or ambiguity. It found the person receiving the message derived 55% of its meaning from the expressions and body language that was used, whereas the tone of voice conveyed only 38% of the meaning of the message, and the actual words represented a mere 7% of the meaning of the message. We can learn from this that in communications involving disagreement, strong emotion, or ambiguity, we can communicate 100% of our meaning effectively if we deliver that message in person, but only 45% if we communicate it over the phone, and only 7% if we rely upon the words used in an email. It's easy to forget that there's a human being at the receiving end of an email. Don't be surprised if that person takes your email the wrong way. The chances are that they probably will. It may seem old-fashioned, but the cornerstone to a harmonious strata community is dealing with problems by seeing each other eye to eye. So let's stay off the emails. Thank you.
So this is, I guess, the debatey part of the evening where I sort of pick up on a couple of the points. Jason, you raised the really interesting, well, not really interesting, but the point.
Mildly interesting.
The mildly interesting point where you talked about bodies corporate should be able to decide upon contracts or contracts after a certain point in time. But are people who are on committees or are owners in general, are they knowledgeable or smart enough to be making that kind of decision? I might actually throw it over to Trevor in the first instance. You have a microphone behind you. Oh, you're right. So just picking up on Jason's point about giving it back over to the body corporate to make decisions on contracts. I just wanted to sort of make the point, do we really think that bodies corporate committees are knowledgeable enough to make those kinds of decisions?
Body corporate committees should make the decisions, small or large decisions. Whether they're qualified or not could be, a debatable point. But ultimately, they own the scheme. Our members are unit owners, and you in the audience tonight who are unit owners have every right to decide how that scheme is managed and the way the contracts are structured and the length of the agreements. It doesn't necessarily mean you're all qualified to do. I'm sure everybody in this room is qualified, but I think you understand the point I'm trying to make, the distinction between whether they're qualified or not.
I do.
Yeah.
Mario?
Yeah, as Trevor said, they should be qualified. The Code of Conduct for committee members requires them to have a certain level of understanding when it comes to the law and their duties as committee members. But in reality, do they actually have that knowledge and expertise? It's a matter for each committee. And one of the points that I'll touch on later is obviously the importance of education, making sure that people understand their rights, their roles, their duties.
Jason, do you want to sort of respond to any of that?
Should committees be qualified to make decisions in terms of service contracts and whatnot? Well, the first issue is that they're not empowered to make those decisions. For a service contract exceeding 1 year, it has to be put to owners in general meeting. But I think what the question's driving at is, are committee members sophisticated enough or well-informed enough to negotiate for themselves as opposed to the alternative of a developer deciding what's in their best interest, a developer who incidentally will profit from the sale of whatever they put in place that someone else has to coexist with for the next 25 years. My answer to that is there are no qualifications for people to be self-interested or in the sense of wanting to look after the best interests of their community. It's done day in, day out, outside the context of management rights. Committees will often go to the market and look for painting suppliers They'll spend hundreds of thousands of dollars with them, but in the course of spending hundreds of thousands of dollars, they will take advice from other people. They will consult with others to talk about what's in their best interest, like project managers, paint specification contractors and what have you. And committees have that ability, and in fact I think they have the duty to take that advice from other people when it comes to putting in place long-term contractual arrangements.
And really quickly, I might just pick up on one of the first points you raised, Jason, about the idea of the body corporate as a community deciding upon people being there and not being there. So some of you might be familiar of the sort of thing which happens in places like New York City in particular, where it's you have things like a co-op, and people don't just rock on up and decide to live in the high-rise. They have to front up for an interview before the co-op and actually make the case as to why they should be allowed to live in that building. Do we think something like that might be a good idea? Mario, in this case.
I think the idea of vetting owners and occupiers is probably something that's difficult. I can understand the rationale behind it. One of the things that I encounter is that very often disputes, particularly bylaw disputes, are caused by new people coming into the scheme who effectively are unfamiliar with the rules. So I think that process of some form of an interview where people are advised as to what the expectations are of owners and occupiers can only be a good thing in terms of reducing potential conflict and increasing harmony.
Trevor?
There already is a mechanism in terms of lot owners being interviewed, and every resident manager is interviewed during the assignment meeting by the committee to see whether they're worthy enough. It's quite an interesting transaction, the assignment meeting, but it means that at least there's one lot owner that has been interviewed by their peer lot owners before they enter the scheme to live and work.
Jason, anything?
Yeah, I advocate more for the opposite in terms of giving the body corporate the ability to move on someone who's been there for a while and proven through their own conduct that they're not a good neighbour. And I don't mean just your average person that's causing a bit of grief at a committee meeting. I'm talking about personalities that cripple strata communities with years and years of litigation and just nuisance behaviour and simply can't coexist. They call the honeymoon period of marriage for a reason, because you go in with the best of intentions, but then you discover what that other person's like after a while, and that's why we have the ability to divorce.
Interesting analogy, Jason. We'll have questions a bit later on. Thank you. With that, I will hand over to Trevor Rawnsley. So a bit about Trevor for those of you who are unaware. ARAMA, the Australian Resident Accommodation Managers Association, is the peak industry body which represents the interests of people who are involved in management rights. As its CEO, Trevor is responsible for the financial performance of the association, member liaison and operational advice. Also responsible for sponsorship liaison, organising branch, state and national committees and producing member educational information events. Trevor, welcome to the stage.
Thanks, Chris. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for coming out on a school night. Hello to those of you tuning in live. Is this being recorded as well? So if you're watching this in the future, nanu, it's all been done. So I start the first slide. Do I have a clicker? Who had the clicker? Oh, Jason's got the clicker. Excuse me. Thank you very much. Yeah, it won't be the last time, Jason, I'm sure. By declaration and disclosure, I'm the only non-lawyer on the panel. So I'm going to be outgunned tonight, and I hope you consider that. Sorry, and Chris, of course, but Chris is far more knowledgeable than me when it comes to the law. So I have to remind myself what we're talking about, because we are talking about how to create harmony, not division. And with respect, Jason, and I do respect both you and Mario, a lot of what you're talking about creates division, not harmony. So I'd rather stick with the topic tonight, which is to create harmonious strata communities. That's why we're here. And I applaud Archers for bringing on a topic like this. We have a room full of people, some of whom are familiar faces to me. Really pleased to see there's quite a lot of resident managers here tonight, and committee members and people who aren't on the committee, all trying to solve the puzzle that Jason talked about quite rightly, which is how to create harmony. So these functions should happen more often. where we have a sensible conversation rather than a combative debate. And so I think I've got the key to creating a harmonious strata community. And it's called the Triangle of Management, and this is what is in the DNA of ARAMA members. So I prefer to refer to ARAMA members not as caretakers, but as resident managers. And the reason for that is we do a lot more than just a caretaker, a janitor. We're the building manager, we're the on-site letting agent. Some people describe the role of a caretaker as 20% letting agent, 20% facility manager, and 60% politician. So we're often the ham and the sandwich. We live on site, we're a lot owner, and we provide service to the scheme, and we also have skin in the game. So it's a very complex position that we're in, which can be stressful. And then you throw in the fact that we're on a committee, automatically appointed to a committee, which I think is a bit unjust. We should be elected to the committee. Our fellow unit owners should be given the opportunity to elect us to the committee or not. But then we should have the same rights as everybody else on the committee, the right to vote. You may not realise we don't have the right to vote on a committee. So we're treated as a lot owner with a different level of authority, different rights. So there's some things that should happen, but this is what does happen, or should happen if you want to create a harmonious society. You'll notice there's 3 points in the triangle. That's pretty obvious. Resident manager, body corporate manager, and the body corporate represented by the committee. A little bit like a group of shareholders in a company represented by the board. And it's important that a resident manager, body corporate manager, and the committee are treated equally and treat each other equally and communicate openly and honestly and transparently. And just like a stool with 3 legs, each one of those legs should be as strong as each other and supportive to support each other. And when those things are in place, you'll notice the communication line between a body corporate manager and resident manager is very important, not to collude and gang up on the committee, but to support the committee. And it's no coincidence that both the resident manager and the body corporate manager are at the base of the triangle holding up the committee. This might sound very idealistic, but it works. There are more schemes where harmony exists than there are where harmony doesn't exist. Usually it's because one leg of those stools or one point on that triangle is stronger than the others or weaker than the others. So we're talking about equal rights, all understanding that there are 3 points in the management triangle, and our point as resident manager is just as important as a good body corporate manager. That's why we don't call body corporate managers minute takers. They do more than take minutes. And that's why we understand that unit owners own the scheme. We are members of the body corporate, therefore a unit owner, we should have equal rights. So that's the body corporate, in my view, the key to harmonious relationships. I want to go a little bit further and talk about, Jason alluded to the fact that for some mysterious reason, long-term agreements are bad for a scheme. So I'm going to argue the opposite, not surprisingly. By the way, Jason and I agree on a lot. And, there's probably 8 out of 10 things we do agree on. And, I'd rather focus on the things we do agree on rather than the things we don't. But since we've been undertaking this roadshow, I've gathered a few stats. And Chris, I just want to make sure I don't go over time because I could talk a while. Over the last couple of years, 2.5 years, have been 250 time and motion studies conducted. That's where an independent assessor comes into a scheme, looks at the work a resident manager does, assesses the amount of time it takes and applies some science to that. Works out a fee. Now, the number one principle of management rights is that it's in the best interests of the scheme, that the work a resident manager does is lower cost, or you get more value than using outside service providers. And that is very true nowadays, particularly with the lack of workforce. I'm sure there are people in this room who are volunteer committee members who are having to do their own cleaning and their own mowing and their own hedge cutting because they're trying to get people in to mow the lawn at $80 an hour if they turn up. And then they'll demand to be paid cash or instantly, which just doesn't work in a body corporate. But when you've got a resident manager in place, you don't have to worry about that. The resident manager is going to be there 24/7, respond in the lick of time. So of those last 2.5 years, 250 reviews found out, well, if they're not, then there's a behavioural issue and that needs to be addressed as behaviour, okay? But 87% of those time and motion study reviews found that the caretaking service provider was underpaid, which means that around about 30%, roughly, of schemes are better off with an on-site manager acting as a caretaking service provider. Of those 87%, 2 minutes, thank you, only 30% accepted an increase after the independent review was done. The majority of those resident managers who undertook a time and motion study and it showed that they were being underpaid leveraged off the pay increase, which was on average 10 to 15%, with some other benefits, and that might be different duties or it might be additional term. So that's further evidence that long-term agreements are in the best interests of the scheme, and as a result of that, and these are facts, and we've got plenty of them on the ARAMA website for members to look at, but those long-term agreements deliver better value, or you get more bang for your buck than you would if you're comparing it to outside caretakers. Thank you. The other point I wanted to look at was that the majority of schemes have adopted new duties as a result of these independent. So there's a specificity in agreements, in new agreements, that can be achieved. So a committee knows exactly what the resident manager is meant to do and can hold them accountable. Once upon a time, agreements were, and there's still a lot of them out there, they were generic and vague. You may have them where you look at the agreement, you think, what is that this person supposed to be doing? And it's create a first-class standard environment in the scheme, gold star, gardening standard, all of that sort of stuff. So what we're seeing is this evolution into specific duties, and that's something that, again, makes it easier for a committee or a lot owner to determine the role of a resident manager. And when it's properly costed, those specific duties, you can clearly see that the role of a resident manager is in the best interest of the scheme because there's some scientific data to support it. So that should convince you, it's convinced me, that management rights is in the best interest of the scheme, and that the way to create harmony is that we all get along and support each other rather than try to find divisions or holes in the argument. So it's peace, love, and rainbows and butterflies, and I'm out. Thank you.
Thank you, Trevor. I just wanted to pick up on one of those stats that you mentioned, Trevor. I think it was 87% of those instances it was found that the caretaker was underpaid. Noting that we had, I believe, a decision today in the Fair Work Commission about the minimum wage in Australia, perhaps it's time for caretaker duties and perhaps remuneration to be regulated by government. Set a standard, no debate, no argument. Jason.
Thank you, Chris. Question on notice. I wouldn't agree. I believe in a freedom to contract. I believe in the flexibility of a property owner to decide what's in their best interests, as opposed to, the problem with government setting award rates is that's the bare minimum that you can pay someone. And I don't think that you should establish caretaking arrangements or building management arrangements based on the bare minimum that someone should be paid. And as Trevor said, it should be a conversation about other ways in which they bring value.
Mario?
Yeah, I tend to agree with Jason. I think it's just, it's far too complex a matter to really rely on government to be able to come in and provide, effectively a minimum rate. I mean, how would you determine that if you've got a resident manager at a 20-lot scheme versus a 200-lot scheme where they've got staff? I mean, it's a highly complex area, and I think that bringing in something like that would probably only just create more disputes rather than create harmony.
Trevor, do you want to pick up on any of those points?
It just shows that we agree on more things that we disagree on. So I'm in furious agreement with the rest of the panel. Every scheme is different, and every set of tasks is different, And when those tasks are performed could vary from one scheme to the next. Even two identical schemes can be costed at a completely different level. So I'm advocating for committees to start working cooperatively with resident managers under the guidance of a good body corporate manager to get these agreements costed accurately and find out what that number is. And as per these stats, it doesn't mean you're going to incur a price rise, because a resident manager might want to be having a conversation with the committee about a change in duties or an increased term, top up or extension.
They won't agree on everything either, by the way, so don't worry, there'll be something else that they'll disagree on eventually. Here's an opportunity to find out that when I introduce our next speaker, Mario Esera. So Mario is litigation partner at HWL Ebsworth. He's specialised in body corporate law for more than a decade. HWL Ebsworth is a full-service commercial law firm with offices in 9 locations. Mario's main area of expertise is in relation to disputes. Funny that. Particularly management rights disputes, building defect claims, bylaw enforcement and levy recovery. Mario primarily acts for bodies corporate and their committees, but also acts for property developers, which are also called original owners, management right holders, caretakers and letting agents, and lot owners. Mario, welcome to the stage.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, everyone, for coming out tonight. And thanks to Nick and Archers as well for putting on this event. One of the things that Chris did at the start of the night is a harmonious strata community something that's achievable, and is it something that we should be trying for? So, in my view, there are a number of small changes that we can make to improve how harmonious strata communities are or are not. I think the legislation is not perfect, so that sort of concept of a utopian harmonious strata community is not achievable. But should we be trying? Yes, we should be trying. And what we can do is we can draw on our experience. As Chris said, this is an area of the law that I've been practicing in for more than 10 years now. All of you here have some involvement or a relationship with strata communities. We can draw on that experience to try and figure out small ways that we can make our strata communities more harmonious and better. So the 3 areas that I'll focus on based on my own experience are committees and how they operate, education, and one of the things that hopefully you'll take away from it is, in my view, education is the most important, and lastly, management rights, which is a topic that's come up a few times this evening. So, committees, in my view, play probably the most important role when it comes to a harmonious strata community. A good committee will usually mean a scheme operates well and operates harmoniously. But there are a number of ways that I think that committees could be improved. The first way there is, I think, that you should pay people to be committee members. Now, the reason why I say that is, as some of you will know, committees are comprised of unpaid volunteers. Bodies corporate can sometimes be managing assets that are worth tens of millions of dollars. You want to have people on there that are the best to be the people that are making these decisions on behalf of members. And one way that I think that could be done is paying people a reasonable annual fee to really encourage those people that you want to have on the committee to be on the committee. The next point there is reviewing the sizes of committees. Some of you may know that a committee can be comprised of only 3 to 7 people, regardless of the size of the scheme. Most managers will tell you that it's a real struggle, even for large schemes, to have a committee. So my view is that if you have more people that want to be on the committee, let them be on there. In my view, it doesn't make any sense that you can have a scheme of 20 lots and the largest committee you can have is 7 people. And the same is said for a scheme with 220 lots. You can still only have a committee comprised of 7. The next point there is make it easier for committees to really regulate themselves, as in regulate their own membership. One of the things that I often see is committees that have perhaps one person on there who is a destructive personality, let's say. Now, what tends to happen is that that personality, that person ends up driving out the people that you actually want to have on the committee. And the people that are left are possibly not the people that you would necessarily choose. So we elect our committees at annual general meetings. We give them certain powers. They're given certain powers under the legislation. In my view, committees should be able to decide whether or not a member goes. There is a process that's currently in place at the moment, but in my view, it is complicated and time-consuming. Committees can decide most things at a committee meeting by way of majority resolution, and I think if they want to get rid of someone, that they should be allowed to do that. The next one there is adopting the number of years that people can sit on the committee, and this kind of ties back into that point that I made about sizes. What I often see are disputes that can sometimes go for a number of years, and what I've seen, again, from my experience, is sometimes having new people coming into the committee can offer a new perspective, can offer a new view, and that sort of fresh set of ideas can be really the key to unlocking like a long-term dispute. But unfortunately, people sometimes have trouble getting on there because of the committee limits, and it's the same people year in, year out that are on there. So we know from US politics that there's a certain number of terms someone can be president, and in my view, it's something that we should look at as well for bodies corporate, just to get that injection of new blood. And as I said, my experience, it can really help resolve some disputes. Educating lot owners. In my view, this is absolutely the most important thing when it comes to avoiding disputes. And the reason for that is because a lot of disputes, arguably all disputes, stem from ignorance of the law. So you have lot owners, you have committee members, you have management rights holders, any one of them, who don't really have a good, strong understanding of their rights, powers and functions. Now, one of the points that we talked about earlier was, this interviewing people when they come on. And I see this a lot in terms of these kind of new entrant disputes. So one of the ways that I think that we could avoid those new entrant disputes is really improving our disclosure statements. So disclosure statements play a really important role in educating people before they become a lot owner. The problem with them is that whilst they're regulated in terms of what has to be in a disclosure statement, they can be extremely dense documents that a lot of people, with respect, just simply don't read. So what I think that we should try to be aiming for is a really simplified, even like a one-page disclosure statement, so that people at a glance can look at it and have a better understanding of things like the bylaws. Now, we know, again, from our experience, the bylaws that are most commonly causing disputes: pets, parking, parties. So make sure that you have, as part of the simplified disclosure statement, a summary of those bylaws which we know cause disputes, so people know what they're getting into. Next point there, the total annual levies on the lot. One of the things that we often see with the levy recovery side of my practice is people buying into a scheme and they can't actually afford the levies. Now, the reason for that is they might have been told by the real estate agent, oh, look, the levies are only this amount per year, you'll be fine. And they get in there and the situation's totally different. If you do a standard records request and you look at the AGM minutes and you see the budgets, it tells you how much per lot entitlement. It's not really a clear way of instantly grasping what do you actually have to pay. So put that on the disclosure statement so people know straight away that's what I have to pay for the admin fund, the sinking fund. Having there the current balance of the body corporate's bank accounts. Let people know when they come in, is this a scheme that's financially hygienic or is it not? And from the building defect aspect of my practice, one of the things I often see is people buy in, scheme has building defects, and they don't realise that it doesn't have the funds in its sinking fund to actually properly deal with it. Now, you do have options. You can go to places like Strata loans, they'll help you out. But, having that information when you're going in, I think, is really important. The next one there is a management rights agreement. If you've got a resident manager, have that in this disclosure statement so people know. Have in there the total maximum term that's remaining on the agreement so people know we've got a resident manager for the next 5 years, 10 years or 25 years. And also let them know what the resident manager is currently being paid so that people have an understanding of that dynamic also. In my view, having that sort of really simple stuff in a disclosure statement will avoid these kind of new entry disputes. So, create this more harmonious community. Management rights. Now, as Chris said in my introduction, one of the main pillars of my practice is management rights disputes. Now, I've really enjoyed these seminars and getting to know Trevor and getting to, I suppose, know that other side. As Chris said in my introduction, I act for management rights holders as well, so I do get to see these things from both sides. But typically when these disputes come to me is because there is an on-site manager who perhaps isn't, a 5-star ARAMA member. So what are the things that we can do to improve it? Because one of the things about management rights disputes is they also tend to be the most expensive. There are now a library of cases where bodies corporate and management rights holders have spent hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars on litigation. There was a dispute just last year in the district court here at Brisbane. It went to a 5-day trial. I would estimate the management rights holder and the body corporate in that case would have easily spent something in the order of $300,000 each. So what can we do to really take some of the sting out of these disputes? The first one there is I think that the Commissioner's Office should produce pro forma remedial action notices. The Commissioner's Office already does that for things like bylaw contraventions. You simply sort of fill in the blanks and you're good to go. Now, the reason why I think it's a good idea for remedial action notices is a lot of these disputes spend, literally days and days looking at whether or not a notice actually is a remedial action notice. So that trial that I talked about last year in the District Court went for 5 days. 4 of those days were the lawyers arguing, was this document a remedial action notice, yes or no? So why spend hundreds of thousands of dollars arguing about whether a document is something or it isn't? Have the Commissioner's Office produce one, fill in the blanks, and then hopefully you won't spend so much time and money arguing about something like that. The second one there is 5-year top-ups. I think that they are problematic and should be removed. Now, the reason for that is because very often these agreements are entered into many years beforehand. You have an agreement that's been entered into 15 years ago and it still has 25 years left on the clock, which means the total term of that agreement is 40 years, but the terms haven't changed. So at the time that agreement was entered into, and as Trevor said, some of these older agreements are so vague they're virtually unenforceable. So I think either remove the top-ups or couple them with effectively a review of the agreement as well. And one of the things that I found really interesting is, with the chats that I've had to Trevor, it's something that I've started to introduce into, these disputes as a way of resolving it, where you have disputes around extensions. So, well, hey, look, we're prepared to look at it, but we also want to have a look at the terms of this agreement as well, because there's 25 years left on it, or there will be if this extension is granted, but you've got this fossil of an agreement which doesn't really affect or reflect the modern needs of this scheme. So let's do them both at the same time. And, much to my surprise and delight for my clients, is a lot of the management rights holders are actually quite amenable to it, because they see the value as well in having a more precise agreement that actually tells them what they're supposed to do, rather than a flowery agreement which talks about keeping grounds in first-class order and repair. So, in conclusion, I think everyone that has an association with strata communities wants them to operate harmoniously. I don't think anyone generally sets out to create conflict. Education is really the key because, like I said, many disputes have this kind of foundation in ignorance. Now, the legislation isn't perfect. We're never going to have these utopian schemes, but we should be trying for better. And what I've done tonight, and I think my sort of fellow speakers have also done, is that there's lots of good ideas out there. And I think it's a case of just trying them out and see how they go, because the worst case scenario is that things remain the same, but you could actually be inching your way towards that harmonious community that we'd all like. Thank you, that's all.
Thank you, Mario. I wanted to pick up on your education point. All well and good, but at last count, there were maybe 1.2 million Queenslanders who were living in strata or involved in strata in some way, perhaps even more than that. That's an awful lot of education, which is in turn going to require an awful lot of resources. Sounds to me like we're talking about a new tax to make that all happen. Jason, do you want to offer some comment on that?
Oh, great. There isn't the infrastructure or the services out there to educate 1.2 million Queenslanders, nor if you put those education services and infrastructure in place, nor would 1.2 million Queenslanders bother to take it up. Reality is that a lot of people don't care. One of the biggest problems in the strata industry is apathy. But should everyone care? I don't think so. I don't think everyone needs to care. That's why lot owners can appoint up to 7 people to be on their committee, and it's those 7 people that put their hands up and say, I will care, that need to be empowered and educated to lead that body corporate in its best interests.
Trevor?
You're right again, Jason. This is becoming uncomfortable for me. Look, there's plenty of things to argue about, but in terms of the committee, and I agree with you 100%, Jason, you can't expect every lot owner to have a responsibility to be educated about the scheme. But you can reasonably expect those volunteers who want to give up their time, that there is some responsibility on their part to receive some education. Chris's previous role as the Commissioner really pushed hard on lot owner education. There's an online program that works very well that means it takes about 20, 25 minutes, produces certificates. Every ARAMA member is mandated to undertake that training. So at least they understand how committees should work and the power or lack of power that each person on the committee should have. And so I'd like voluntarily, out of this series of roadshows talking about Harmony, I'd like to suggest that every committee member, every person who volunteers to join a committee, and just within 30 days of the AGM, 30 days after their appointment, undertakes the online training, which is provided by the Commissioner's office. And if they refuse to, then you've really got to question their motives. It means that they either don't want to know the rules or they don't care about the rules. And that really does out some people who have a vested interest or a hidden agenda. So I think education, whilst we can't educate every lot owner, I agree, we should at least start with committees. And the training and education is already there and it's not hard to access.
Mario, anything to pick up on there?
Well, coming back to your first point, I certainly wouldn't advocate for a new tax. Well, if I was going to win tonight's debate, I definitely wouldn't want to advocate for a new tax. But I understand your point, which is that a lot of these disputes are handled by the Commissioner's office, which is hugely overworked and under-resourced. And I think that in terms of, how do we go about educating, I'm often amazed at how few people actually are even aware of the Commissioner's office. It's a really good sort of at least first port of call for a lot of the questions that people have. And I think that perhaps what we could do is rather than, look at new taxes to better fund the Commissioner's office, use what we've already got in the public coffers to just increase people's awareness of the Commissioner's office so that they know that there is an avenue where they can get some good, free, accessible information. The Commissioner's office website hasn't changed in a very long time, so perhaps there needs to be some updates there just to make sure that that information that people really want is readily accessible.
Thanks, Mario and team. We are up to the Q&A segment. I know everyone's favourite segment. I'm going to hand over to Nicky now to explain the rules of engagement. And our speakers were all up on stage at this bit, I believe.
Now, I was looking for, and I'm not implying that everybody's tall, but you are. Okay, so I know that didn't sound like there was a lot of combative arguments there, but I think you'll all agree that it's very hard to arrive for every scheme for a one-size-fits-all. Now, we've got time, because we ran over just a bit, lawyers, and Trevor, not a lawyer. So what I'd like to do is ask 5 questions max from the room. Now, I know that sometimes we can ask many questions in one, but we need to ask one question. And if you can ask the person that you would like the response from, that would be great. So just a show of hands of who would like to ask a question. The gentleman over here, we'll just run a microphone over to you so everybody can hear us. Won't be a moment. And while we're waiting, for those at home, I'm sorry we have run out of time, but still put your questions in and we'll make sure we answer them within the coming days. So thank you. Over to you.
Trevor, I just want to know, managers leave. We've got a manager at the moment, we've had managers in the past, where our contract specifically says they're allowed 30 days annual leave, but they've got to give us 30 days prior to them going away. We've got a couple, we had one last who took a work camp, so he's away for 27 days at a time. Our new one at the moment is away 2 days a week, and he's been there for now 6 months, and his 30 days annual leave is up. What is the procedure?
Okay. Some feedback happening. Stand up, turn this on.
Stand up, you like it.
So thanks for the question. The answer to that question lies in the terms and conditions of the contract. So, our view and the view of, I think, everybody on the panel would be that you refer to the contract. If the contract says you can be there 1 day a week, or it doesn't matter how long you're there, or maximum term of leave is 30 days, then they're the conditions. And if a resident manager is not adhering to the contract, then I think that's a really good reason to have a sit down and a discussion and try and examine why. And if that leads to a remedial action notice, then so be it. So the contract needs, that's why I'm arguing the contract needs to be specific, okay? And if it is, then it makes it easier for everybody to hold the resident manager accountable.
Thank you. That's basically, the contract is specific. We did sort of say that, and what the problem being was, he couldn't wait to sign the contract. He was there for 3 months, then realised he wasn't making money, so he had to go and work 2 days away.
Well,
but he's still living on site, but he's away 2 days of the week. And the problem I'm getting is I go up there on a Friday afternoon to get away from all the crap that I have to work with, and I'm getting a rang by the unit owner saying, this son of a bitch is doing nothing.
So in that particular circumstance, it would be great for you to stick around afterwards, talk to Trevor about some solutions specific to your scheme, but that's a very good question.
Oh, the solution's easy. We'll just get a solicitor and it's firing. Thank you.
Okay, we have another lady
Good
over
luck.
here. Thank you very much for the question.
Okay, sorry, before we move to that question, there is an alternative to lawyering up, and that is to sit down respectfully and have a discussion. And if you try, that, then maybe there's an opportunity to mediate with somebody who knows. I mean, we have a lot of peer ARAMA where an operator may not be the right thing, and they'll talk to another resident manager, and that resident manager will help them understand the ramifications of continuing to breach their agreements. So sometimes you might ask that resident manager, ARAMA, if they're not, they should be, and ask them to ring me.
Plug. Okay, let's turn that microphone off, and you guys are just going to have to talk super loud. The lovely lady in there, you're next. Thank you.
Hi, my question is for Mario. In regards to bylaws, which are supposed to be there to help us create these harmonious environments, how do you deal with people that repeatedly breach bylaws and disregard them? They seem to be very much a toothless tiger.
Yeah, with bylaw contraventions, that's something that we deal with a lot. And the way in which the legislation is set up is that if you issue a contravention notice and it's not complied with, then the next step from there, we've got a couple of options. One is you can apply to the magistrate for them to be fined. And then the other option is that you can go to the Commissioner's office and obtain an order from an adjudicator that basically requires them to comply. Now, the reason why you might do one over the other, and I always recommend that you go to the Commissioner's office, is because you get a more directed order. For one, it's tailored to a specific person telling them they have to do a certain thing. But also, if a person contravenes an adjudicator's order, then they can be subject to a fine of up to $50,000. Now, obtaining those fines, unfortunately, is very, very difficult, but oftentimes it's the threat of that fine is enough to really bring someone into line. So I wouldn't just continually issue contravention notices. I would issue one. If they don't comply with it, then immediately look to apply to the Commissioner's office for an order from an adjudicator saying this guy has to comply. Yeah.
If I could add to that, Chris and I, he said it earlier, we're both directors at Strata Community Association in Queensland, and we're both responsible for advocacy. And you're absolutely right when you describe the bylaw enforcement system as being a toothless tiger. It is. Everything that Mario said is spot on correct from a legal perspective. When we were lobbying to increase the power of bodies corporate to enforce their bylaws, we've put before the government a case example of a strata community in Brisbane where it was clear that they had a bylaw saying occupiers can't park in the visitor car park. They had clear evidence that an occupier was doing this repeatedly, bylaw contravention notice, repeated warnings, not being followed, kept on doing it, application in the Commissioner's office, and it was a fait accompli. They got the order. Don't park in the visitor car park, repeating what the bylaws said. How dare you? That took 12 months for them to do it, right? And lo and behold, if they involve a solicitor, like you've got added cost on top of it. SCA is advocating to the Queensland Government to really increase those powers of a body corporate, not only to make bylaws that can distinguish one community from another, but also to allow a body corporate to properly enforce the bylaws in more immediate terms. So we've advocated that bodies corporate should have the power to identify as schemes that will allow committees to issue fines for repeated bylaw contraventions. Why do you need to go to an adjudicator in 12 months of a process to point out the bleeding obvious? that they're not complying with the bylaws. I don't know that we're going to get wider support because there just seems to be this cynicism around bodies corporate and whether they do the right thing, whereas most committees that I work with, they are passionate, they are acting in good faith, they want to do the right thing, but they're not given the tools in the legislation to look after that community properly. But good question.
Great. We have another one from the floor.
Yeah, thank you very much. My question is essentially directed to Mario from a point that he raised, but also to the panel generally, and thank you very much. Fascinating evening. Private social networks controlled by the body corporate, what experience have you had in the effect of bringing lot owners together and including educating them by using a private social network?
It's not something I've encountered before, actually. I have heard of, committees having like a WhatsApp group that they use to communicate with each other. And I know that, some body corporate management companies offer like owners portals when you can go on there as an owner and log in and, find body corporate records and those types of things. But it's not something that certainly I personally have ever come across. I could imagine, like with most things, there will be pros and cons. You'll probably have some of the problems that Jason was talking about, people, making comments, trolling and those types of things.
Sorry.
I was just going to add to... Oh, no, it's just like I said, it's some of my panellists may have more experience dealing with those types of things than me. Good question.
I would have thought Chris was in a good place to answer this.
Yeah, look, I know of several buildings, particularly larger buildings, that set up Facebook groups for residents, and that sounds great, but remember, Facebook is largely unmoderated. Remember also that there has been at least one decision that I'm aware of which held that whoever is responsible for the page might also be responsible for the comments that are made under that page as well. So need to take a lot of care in that situation. Remember also that that kind of social media presence is more than likely, in fact, it's probably not even likely, it is a body corporate record if it's convened by the committee. Therefore, that is accessible to any interested person, which can include prospective owners, tenants, and their agents. And then just finally, an anecdote. On the weekend just past, I attended a meeting for a client, and we had an old-fashioned meeting on the common area lawn next to the tennis courts. Sometimes old-fashioned actually works.
Yeah, well said.
I could just add, I've had a bit of experience with these social networks, and my experience leads me to firmly conclude that social networks are good for strata communities when all you're doing is organising social activities and building community and neighbourly relations. But they're awful when you discuss body corporate issues through Facebook. So that was the point that I was making, to have those discussions in person next to the tennis court on the common property lawn.
Trevor, do you have any comments on that one?
What they said.
Great. Oh, we invited him to be the cat amongst the pigeons. Well done. 2 more questions is all we have time for. Is there... Oh, this lovely lady in the front. Thank you very much.
My question is, in the complex that I live, I understand there were some repairs that were paid by body corporate, and we're in the process of changing body corporate management. We don't have a non-site manager, but apparently many of the repairs were owner's responsibility. So my question is, can we recoup that money? Is it worth doing it? Because it might be expensive legally. It might be over $100,000. And then one of the units is selling. So can we recoup that money even though the person sells?
So I think after it, come and have a chat to Mario or I about the specifics, like the commerciality in terms of how much money's involved and what. But more broadly to the question, where a body corporate expends its funds, repairing parts of the property that are actually the responsibility of a lot owner. Your question is, well, can they recoup that? There is a process under the regulation module where a body corporate can carry out work that a lot owner had an obligation to carry out under the Act, the regulation or the bylaws, but they failed to carry it out. The body corporate then has the ability to recover the reasonable costs of that work as a debt from the owner.
Being a maintenance question, Trevor, do you have a position on that?
Yeah, I might go without the microphone. Can you hear me down the back of the cheap seats?
No, they can't.
Okay, that means we need a microphone. So maintenance is number one topic for argument, whether there's management rights in place or not. But I'm always about prevention better than cure, and that's where if you don't have a resident manager, or even if you do, you should be seeking the guidance of a good body corporate manager who becomes the memory in that scheme. So I'm sure that if you turn to a good body corporate manager and you seek advice about what is the responsibility of the lot owner, what's the responsibility of the body corporate, then those things could be avoided. No, it's not. No.
So when it comes to your specific question, it sounds like there's a lot of detail in there to be able to give you some guidance. So I would recommend starting off with Mario or Jason, and that will help sort of guide you in the right direction.
But can I just add, make sure you've got a good body corporate manager who can guide you in the future to avoid having to go back over the past.
Okay, lucky last. Let's go out with a bang.
Hi, just the resident manager term, the 5-year top-ups and all that. You mentioned in the other states it's 3 years in Victoria and reduced in New South Wales. Is it ever going to change in Queensland?
Can I answer that? What Jason said is not entirely accurate. That might come as a surprise.
Good question.
And you did raise term, but let me just say term is irrelevant when it comes to harmony. But we've had discussions with the Victorian government about long-term agreements, and the view of the Victorian government is that they agree that long-term agreements are in the best interest of the owners' corporation and owners' corporate, body corporate. In Victoria, it's the same thing called different names. So just because you have a 3-year agreement doesn't mean you're going to have harmony. In fact, look at our political landscape. We've just been through a federal election. We've elected a new government. I hope that new government succeeds. We should all get behind that new government and ensure that they succeed. But in terms of federal politics with a 3-year term, it's going to take this government about a year to clean things up and get through all of their excuses about the mess that was left behind and why we have to increase taxes and everything else. Get ready for it. It's happening now. Then in year 2, they can actually make some legislative change. And then in year 3, doesn't matter which government, they're all preparing for the next election. So that's why when we're talking about schemes and what's in the best interest of the scheme, long-term agreements are in the best interest of the scheme because somebody's got to think about the future, 10, 15, 20, 50 years ahead, not just the next 12 months, not just the next 3 years. Here we go.
Allow me to retort. When Trevor was doing his presentation, he was talking about time and motion studies, right? Consultants. And the way that he described it, I think his words were they come out to the scheme and they assess the work that the manager does and then they assign a value to it. I don't want to be pedantic with my words, but that's not what they do. They assess what the manager should be doing. Not what they're doing, what they should be doing. And I just wanted to clarify that because part of the biggest problem I see with management rights, it's not necessarily 10 years, 25 years. It's the fact that 10 to 25 years gives one person a significant capital asset that they absolutely will fight for. It's not the same as a body corporate manager that's on a term of 1 to 3 years. If they have a fallout with the committee, they might say, well, we're going to look elsewhere for our business, or they might try to go really, apply the surgery to the relationship and really lift their performance. It's different when you gift them, right, a capital value asset, or rather the developer gifts themselves that capital value asset. So what I said in my presentation is that Victoria had banned developers from imposing long-term service contracts where they get a profit except for hotel or resort accommodation. What that means is that Victoria has said it should be up to bodies corporate down there to figure out what's in their best interests, whether that's a long-term agreement or a short-term agreement. In Queensland, the practice is we don't have that ability because developers have the ability to impose those long-term agreements on them.
I will make some comments just to calm the farm over here, and apologies for coughing. There is an ability for the original owner to set a contract for a long tenure, and within the first 3 years for that to be reviewed and exited. A lot of committees don't know about it. A lot of body corporate managers may not know about it. We know about it. We make sure that our committees are apprised of that. I think that Jason's view that a committee should be able to self-regulate. If you want to put in a 25-year tenure and you're very happy with the duties of that caretaker and you have a high letting pool and that suits the community, then I think they're coming at it from the same perspective, it's just different words. So there is a place for a caretaker when you've got a specific scheme with a specific setup. But in Victoria, it might not be the same as South East Queensland, who have a very high letting pool and a lot of people putting into that letting pool as an investment. So one size fits all does not come into play. But again, sometimes there are long tenures that are enforced on schemes where they don't fit either. So I would like the other panellists to also share their view on this very topical before we wrap up.
Well, as much as I like the sound of my own voice, I don't really have a whole lot more to add. I think that you summarised it really well, Nix, in terms of, that there is this kind of middle ground. And I guess the perspective that I bring to it, which is slightly different to my, my expert panellists, is that I kind of see it from both sides. So I act for the developers who do sell these management rights for profits. And I do, we often talk them through the dangers of, an engagement where the terms of the engagement are not well defined, where the person that's purchasing may not necessarily be a good fit for that future scheme. And equally, I see what it's like for new schemes who discover after 5 years that the opportunity to have that engagement has been and gone, and discovered that that they're locked into an engagement that still has 20 years left on the clock with a resident manager who perhaps is not resident manager that they would have chosen had they been given that choice. Chris?
Two things, I guess. The first one is, to me, it's kind of immaterial what the term is, so long as the job is being done to a standard that we're all happy with. And from personal experience, I used to live in a scheme where the caretaker was also my real estate agent. And one day I came home to find that mysteriously some parcels I'd been expecting turned up on my kitchen bench. Turns out that the caretaker, my letting agent, had taken it upon himself to deliver those up to my apartment. Now, you can sort of argue and quibble about should he have done that, shouldn't he have done that. I can almost guarantee you that would not have been in the terms of his contract to do it. But he did it to keep on my good side. So that's point one. Point two, your comment, is it going to change? When will it change? Body corporate legislation's under review in Queensland, has been under review for some time. Jason, myself, Trevor as well, all members of the working group that's looking at that. If there is a change that you want to Strata legislation, then you need to be speaking to your Member of Parliament and making your views known. That's their job, to listen to that.
Beautifully capped off there. That's so good. So thank you for a very robust discussion that we've had on the topic today. I think we all agree that there's no silver bullet when it comes to harmony in Strata, but if we can all try to work collaboratively and in the best interests of the group, I think we'll go a very long way to get there. Thank you to our guest speakers. I'd like you to join me in a round of applause. And for our online audience, that's where we leave you now. Don't forget your feedback forms and your questions. Really appreciate you joining us. Thank you very much. Now, before you guys all run off, there's a few other things that I'd like to do before we get out the nibbles and the bubbly. Before I...